The sample arrived on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays are intake days in my unit, and I process between 30 and 60 specimens before the shift rotation ends. The human came in as lot number 7 in a batch of 11, border skirmish in the Sofath corridor. 4 confirmed casualties, 1 human among them. The intake form was unremarkable. Cause of cessation: catastrophic thoracic trauma, confirmed site by 2 field medics and 1 Accord compliance officer. Time of death logged. Sample harvested within the standard collection window. Tissue type: skeletal muscle, secondary sheath, and a section of connective matrix from the upper left quadrant. Approximately 40 grams total. I cataloged it. Sealed it in standard inert suspension medium. I filed it. I want to be precise about that word. Inert, our suspension medium is not merely cold. It does not merely slow biological activity. It halts it. That is the point. The medium is calibrated to arrest all known cellular processes: metabolic exchange, membrane signaling, ionic drift, across every cataloged species in the Accord's biological archive. A sample in inert suspension is, functionally, stopped. It does not change. It does not degrade, because degradation is itself a process, and the medium prevents processes. Goes in on day 1 is identical to what comes out on day 400. This is not an approximation. It is the reason the archive exists. Sealed the human sample and moved on to lot number 8. For 39 days I did not think about it again. The check on day 40 is routine. It is written into the archive protocol as a data integrity confirmation. Not because we expect to find anything, because the Accord requires a logged verification at the 40-day mark for all post-mortem samples of species rated Class 2 or above. The human was rated Class 2 on intake. I ran the verification. The suspension readings were wrong. I ran them again, because wrong readings have a cause, and the most common cause is instrument error. The second reading matched the first. I recalibrated the sensor array and ran a third. It matched the previous 2. I stood in front of the archive unit for a period I cannot precisely reconstruct. My log shows a gap of approximately 4 minutes between my third sensor query and my next recorded action. And I looked at the numbers. The sample was not degrading. Every known organic tissue in inert suspension follows a flat curve. The graph should have been a horizontal line from day 1 to day 40, because nothing was supposed to be happening. What I was looking at was not a horizontal line. Cellular orientation had shifted. Not randomly. Randomly would have suggested contamination. And I checked for contamination twice and found none. Directionally, the cells were not drifting. They were orienting toward each other, toward a coherent structural arrangement that the tissue had not been in when I sealed it. The human had been dead for 40 days. The sample had no organism to report to. There was no blood supply, no neural signal, no hormonal gradient, no external pressure of any kind. The medium prevented all of that by design. The sample was doing this alone. I escalated at that point. I am a junior pathologist. I am qualified to recognize an anomaly, and I am qualified to log it. And those are the appropriate limits of my response when the anomaly is something I do not have a framework for. I sent a priority query to senior pathologist Keth Dar with a full data package and a note that I had verified the readings 3 times and recalibrated in between. Dar arrived within the hour. She did not tell me I had made an error. I appreciated that, though it was not the reassurance I wanted. What I wanted was to be wrong. Dar ran her own verification sequence, a wider panel than mine, including a full-spectrum biological activity scan and a cross-referenced morphology comparison against the day 1 intake images. The day 1 images showed the tissue as it had been collected. Traumatized, disordered, the kind of structural chaos you expect from catastrophic injury. The day 40 images showed something I do not have precise clinical language for. The cells were closer to correct than they had been on day 1. Not repaired. I want to be careful with that word. I am not claiming the tissue was healing, because healing requires an organism, and there was no organism. What I am claiming is that the disorganization present on intake had partially resolved. The cellular architecture was orienting toward the arrangement that any tissue of this type should have, that it would have in a living organism in a healthy state. It was approximately 14% less disordered than it had been when I sealed it. Dar looked at the images for a long time. Then she asked me to pull the full archive record on every human tissue sample we had processed in the last 3 years. There were 9. She ran the same comparison on each one. 7 of the 9 showed the same pattern, at varying degrees and varying timelines. The earliest onset in the archive was day 28. The latest first detection was day 53. The degree of reorientation across the 7 samples ranged from 6% to 22%. All 9 samples were from confirmed dead subjects. All 9 had been sealed in inert suspension under standard protocol. All 9 had been rated Class 2 or above. Dar was quiet for a long time after that. Worked in Dar's unit for 2 years, and I have never seen her quiet in the way she was quiet, looking at those 9 records. It was not the silence of someone who is thinking. It was the silence of someone who has finished thinking and does not like where it ends. She filed a directorate advisory that same afternoon. I read it before the compliance officer arrived. The language Dar used was precise, as her language always is. She described the phenomenon as autonomous cellular orientation response, a persistence of structural intent in post-mortem tissue operating independently of any governing biological system, in conditions specifically calibrated to prevent all biological activity. She noted that the mechanism was unknown. She noted that it was consistent across all sampled subjects, regardless of age, sex, or the nature of the fatal trauma. She noted that the suspension medium appeared to slow the process but not arrest it, and that the process appeared to have a directional goal, not entropy, not decomposition, but reconstruction toward a prior functional state. The compliance officer came and went. He was efficient. He noted that archive protocols for human tissue samples would require revision, and that the revision would include monitoring intervals reduced from 40 days to 5, and indefinite suspension of the standard final disposal procedure until the phenomenon was better understood. He used the phrase, precautionary hold. He said it the way someone says a thing when they are not ready to say what they actually mean. After he left, Tar and I stood in the archive room for a moment before we went our separate ways. She looked at the sealed unit containing the sample from Lot 7, Batch 11, the human from the Soviet corridor. The one who had been dead for 40 days and was in some cellular sense still organizing. She said, quietly, "I'd like to know what it thinks it's going back to." She did not mean it literally, I think. She meant the question the same way the compliance officer meant precautionary hold. As the edge of language is also the edge of the framework we have for this. She said it, and then she left, and the archive room was quiet. I stayed a few minutes longer than I needed to. I have worked in post-mortem processing for 6 years, faced some specimens from 31 cataloged species. The rules of tissue are not complicated. An organism dies, the systems that maintained it cease, and then the matter that made it follows the ordinary gradient back into its components. That is what death is, at the cellular level. It is the cessation of the argument against entropy. Human tissue, on the evidence I have, does not stop making the argument. I do not know where it ends. The 14% reorientation in my sample was the last figure I logged before the compliance officer put the unit on indefinite hold, and I have not opened it since. I do not know if it is at 15% now, or 20, or something the morphology scale does not have a number for yet. I do not know what it would reach if we waited long enough. I am not certain I want to know, and I am not certain that uncertainty is scientific caution, rather than something older and less precise. I filed the sample as dead tissue because it was dead. The organism was gone. The Accord compliance officer confirmed it. 2 field medics confirmed it. The intake form was correct. The sample had not been consulted on the matter, and it appears to have formed its own opinion. I still do my 40-day checks. I do them every 5 days now, per the revised protocol. Every time I run the sensor array, I hold the results for a moment before I read them. And every time I read them, I write the new number into the log. And every time I write the new number, I sit with it for a moment before I move on. The number goes in one direction. It always goes in the same direction.